Welcome to week 8. We are going to discuss the next topic in our course, and in this session we are going to discuss the network, and I'm going to take this opportunity to review the theoretical framework as well for that is related to network. Okay, and this concept network is quite critical as well, since it is considered as the assets of the organization. Now let's have a look at the story behind the networks. Okay, so that's what we mean by network. Relationships of people who share similar aspirations and interests, and it helps us to expand and share the information, knowledge, perspectives, and skills. Right? So because of network, okay. So you can imagine that in our organization, we have certain skills and knowledge, and to do our tasks, we also need to share the knowledge and information, as well as perspectives and skills with the other people. And at the same time, we also expect the other people do the same thing for us. They do whatever they are, whatever they can, whatever they are able to do according to their expertise. And it helps us to extend our sphere of influence. Okay, so from network perspective, it helps us to improve our sphere of influence. Okay, remember the role of manager. We also need to have the interpersonal skills that helps us to influence people. So networking in here helps us to get to that point. Okay, so there's some benefits of building networks. Okay, we can group them into 3 types of benefits. The first one is the operational network, and then personal, and then the next one is the strategic network. Okay, for the operational network, we can get the benefits because we can get help in terms of managing the internal responsibilities. Okay, because of a network at the workplace, we can invite, we can attract people to help us. Okay, either from our internal stakeholders or external stakeholders. Okay, you may ask yourself, in an organization, especially a large organization, where we may be lost in quote unquote in the jungle of the organization structure, and at some point of time we may need to perform certain tasks and that require someone else, and we may not we may not have the knowledge of who the other person is. Then we talk to our network, and our network may direct us to someone, that someone may direct us to someone else, until we get to the point where we meet our key stakeholder who can help us doing that task. Okay, and the next one is the personal networks, which are made up mostly of a range of people outside the organization who assist our personal and professional development. So that's the benefit of networking from the personal perspective. Okay, and you may be a member of your professional organization, okay, or professional association, either in marketing, in sales, or association of managers, for instance, okay, where you can network with other managers, okay, or association of directors, where you can network with other directors, swap information, or get some support from the other people as well. Okay, and the next one is the strategic network, where it helps us to build the business acumen and help us to figure out the future priorities and challenges that our organization need to contend with. Okay, and therefore we need to contend with. Okay, so it helps sharpening our business acumen, basically because of network. We swap information. It helps us to look at it. It brings us some insights that we also need to be prepared. Okay, now in terms of network, if we look at the organizational design, it is actually the challenge of the organization, especially a large organization, okay, where it integrates and aligns people. Okay, that's the purpose of network. Now, if you look at that, this need is actually driven by the nature of silence of the organization. If you think about a large organization, we may find people work in the alienated way, if you like, which is basically taken from the Marxism concept, basically, where when the organization develops, we may create alienated people where they are basically in their own cubicle. Okay, they think about themselves and they are kind of inside the organization. Okay, you may recall that in the Marxism concept as well, it is also part of the criticism of the Marxism, where with the specialization of workforce or division of labor, okay, that will lead to the silence of the organization members or the alienated members. Okay, therefore it is the challenge of the organization to integrate and align people. Okay, organizations normally conduct a number of activities to help their members, the members of the organization to develop network within the organization, because that will help them to perform better. Okay, and in other words, network actually contains interaction performed by the organization's members. Okay, and this interaction becomes the assets of the organization. If you look at it from the social capital perspective, that will be discussed next few slides. Okay. Okay. So, how can we build the networks? Okay. If network is important both for us and also for the organization, and in the broader sense for the industry, okay, how can we build the network? Well, we can do that with through a number of ways, actually, such as attending seminars and conferences where we swap business cards, we swap names, put names into faces, and we swap interests and follow that up. Okay, so that's what experts suggest as well. Networking is not only about swapping business cards, but it's also about follow-ups, the follow-up conversations, the follow-up communication with the other people. Okay, and being a friendly face. Okay, of course, friendly face. We need to show that, and lending a helping hand to people. That is actually the key to build network. Okay, being active in service clubs, okay, or social clubs, okay, in the industry groups, for instance, and associations related to work and interests. Okay, so if you are a member of a certain association, and you can also improve your network in that association by putting your hand up. Hey, I can do that, I can do this, okay, and I can contribute to my community by doing this, for instance, okay. And being thoughtful and staying in touch with phone calls and emails, or by sending a relevant article, newspaper clipping, or a thank you note to someone who has supported you. Okay, thank you very much, you have helped me in that task last time, and appreciate that, and this is just a little thank you note for you. Or eating lunch with different people 2 or 3 days a week. That's what they suggest as well. Why with different people? Well, because you want to expand on network further. Okay. Right. There are a few other things as well in terms of ways to build networks, okay? Like getting out and about, and putting yourself, your industry, and your organization forward in a good light, okay? Interact formally and informally with people inside and outside of the organization, or participate in the company events, okay, such as the conference, sales conference, for instance, okay? Or Christmas, for instance, which is quite nice actually. I trust we just had that a few months ago, and making point of speaking to a few people that you don't know. That helps us to expand our network. Okay? Maintain the professional profiles on social and business networking sites, such as LinkedIn, for instance. Okay, that helps us to expand on our network as well. Okay. Right. Now, some organizations also facilitate the networking opportunities, okay? They help the employees to connect and share information and ideas, all right? And this is what they also do, actually, through creating what they call the corporate social networking, through blogs, for instance, okay, discussion board, or the organization's wikis, or conference, and so on and so forth, right? So organization facilitates that as well, okay? Right, now let's look at the theoretical perspective of network, okay, which is strongly related to the social capital, okay? That concept was introduced by Bourdieu back in 1986. He was the first one who used that concept, engineered that concept, and that concept has evolved into a number of things, actually, including the 3 dimensions of social capital that we are going to discuss in the next couple of slides. Okay? So social capital, as we discussed some time ago, it contains networks of relationships that constitute a valuable resource for the conduct of social affairs, providing their members with the collectivity own capital, a credential which entities them to credit in the various senses of the word. In other words, it is the asset embedded in the social relationship. Okay, because of our relationship, we have the asset for us and also for the organization. Why relationship becomes the asset? Because that relationship helps us to get the information, and in the context of competition, it helps us to improve the competition because we gain the information as well as we have the opportunity to develop knowledge. That's the one that we are going to discuss as well in the next few slides. Okay. All right. Now, so we have 3 dimensions of social capital. Okay, so although from the analysis perspective, we may be able to differentiate them, but in fact, it is challenging to differentiate them. As a concept, we can differentiate them, but again, and in practical terms, we may find it hard because they are embedded as one package of the social capital concept. Okay, now let's look at them. Okay? So a structural embeddedness. Okay? It concerns with the properties of the social system and of the network of relations as a whole. Okay, or in other words, it is actually about the overall pattern of connections between actors. Okay. So it is actually about who you reach, okay, and how you reach them, okay, who you're connected to and how you're connected with them, okay. So that's the structural embeddedness, okay. The next one is the relational dimension, where it is actually about the kind of personal relationship people have developed with each other through a history of interaction. So if the previous one is about who and how we are connected, okay, this one here, the relational in here, actually is the definition of our relationship. Okay, what is our position in this relationship? Okay, is that because of the friendship? Is that because of the respect? Or at a more close relationship, is that because we are partners and so on and so forth? That basically is the relational dimension. Okay, and the last one is the cognitive dimensions, where the cognitive dimensions are basically the resources providing the shared representation. So representations or interpretations and systems of meaning among parties. So we shared that meaning together as a group. Okay, we shared that symbols, we shared the language, we shared the corporate jargons, for instance. Okay, we shared the some other symbols as part of the intellectual capital. Okay, now if you have moved jobs, for instance, you can compare the cognitive dimension um, uh, between the current organization and the previous organization, in the sense that what jargons that normally people talk about in the previous organization and in the current organization. Okay, so that reflects the cognitive dimension of the social capital. Okay, right. So there are three dimensions of social capital. Remember, the structural embeddedness is actually about the pattern connections. Okay, therefore it's about who that we are connected to and how we are connected with them. And the relational dimension is actually about the type of the personal relationship, okay, or how we interact with the others, okay, how we interact with the others, okay. And the cognitive is actually the shared meaning, the shared symbol with the others, including the shared values in the organization, mission, and so on and so forth, okay. All right, now, we've been discussing that network is an asset of the company. Okay, how can that become an asset? Let's have a look at it. Okay, well, traditionally, the assets that organizations need to compete include the physical and human capital assets. Okay, and both of them are actually reliant on the financial capital as well. Okay, so to compete, when we operate, think about this. Okay, as a question. If you want to operate as a business or as a club or a social or sport organization, for instance, we need these capitals. Okay, we need human capital, we need physical capital, we also need financial capital. Okay, to run this this organization. Okay, think about any organizations, either Manchester United or Real Madrid, for instance, okay, or in Australia we can think about the NRL or IFL, for instance, okay. They have the capitals as well, okay. Now, Bert, for instance, another scholar that also contributes to the social capital studies, suggests that the other type of capital that organizations need is the social capital. Okay, and it is a different type of assets to the traditional assets because it is owned jointly by all members. Okay, it is owned jointly by all members. Okay, so if you think about it for a moment, owned jointly by all members. Okay, so we all share that. Okay, we all share that asset. Okay, as part of the organization. Okay, so you can imagine that if one of the members, especially the key members, leave the organization, it may change the nature of the assets because one of the owners leaves the organization. Okay, well, you can contrast, for instance, sport organizations such as Manchester United, for instance. You can compare Sir Alex Ferguson with the Jose Mourinho, for instance, and now we have Solskjaer, for instance, that who has become the acting manager. You can compare these types of members as well. Okay, in terms of owning the network, owning the asset together. Okay. Therefore, since it is owned jointly by all members, it cannot be traded easily. Okay, so if we sell the organizations, if we sell the company, for instance, or if we sell the sport club that we own to someone else, for instance, okay, well, we can sell the traditional assets. Okay, we can sell the physical assets. Financial assets will go away as well. Okay, that includes the liabilities and so on and so forth. and human capital will also be acquired. Okay, if the new owner wants to still employ them, and the social capital may not be transferred. Okay, because the social capital is actually the network that we own, because we are involved in that organization. Okay, think about organizations that sport club like Manchester United that we just discussed briefly. Okay, right. Okay, so we discussed social capital that drives the network as an asset. How can that become an asset? Well, this is another angle of looking at it as an asset. Okay, the intellectual capital here is another approach to explain that as an asset. Okay, now let's have a look at this concept. The intellectual capital is actually knowledge and knowing capability of a social collectivity. Okay, the social the concept collectivity is probably not a good English, but it is actually showing the collectiveness. Okay, so we own that together. Okay, so the knowledge and knowing capability of a social collectivity, such as an organization, intellectual community, or professional practice. Okay, so that's what we mean by intellectual capital. Knowledge has been recognized as available resource aside from the traditional assets that we discussed before. Okay, the physical asset, human asset, and financial assets. Okay, they are the traditional assets that we know for ages, and recently scholars also suggest that hang on a second, the knowledge is also a valuable resource of the organization. Okay, and the good thing about knowledge is that it is not easy to copy. Okay, if we look at the other types of asset, like physical asset, for instance, especially, it is not that difficult to imitate the physical assets. Okay. Okay, now let's look at it further. Okay, let's look at the types of knowledge. Okay, we have scholars offering their own classification of knowledge. Okay, there are scholars suggesting know-how. Knowledge can be grouped into two groups. Know-how, or the procedural knowledge, and the other one is know what, or declarative knowledge. Okay, they know what needs to be done, for instance, they know what direction that they need to take, for instance. Okay, that becomes a declarative knowledge. Okay, and the other scholars also suggest different types of knowledge. Okay, tacit and explicit knowledge, where tacit knowledge is the incommunicable. It's hard to communicate it. It's hard to to transfer it. Okay, therefore people say that when someone leaves the organization, they may also bring the tacit knowledge. Okay, the explicit knowledge can be shared easily, but the tacit knowledge, since it is not easy to be communicated, it may also go away. Okay, therefore, one of the challenges of the organization is to allow how knowledge can be shared, including the ones that is hard to communicate. Okay. All right. So the what does the intellectual capital do in regards to the social capital? Well, the social capital is an important influence on the development of intellectual capital. Okay? Network is important. Network influences the development of the intellectual capital. Okay, now think about it. Okay, the key point in terms of developing the intellectual capital or knowledge is the new knowledge is developed through combination and exchange. Okay, combination of and exchange of what? Of the current knowledge. Okay, so we make new combinations, or we exchange the knowledge. Okay, to generate new knowledge. That is the reason why it is critical. Okay, and that can happen if the organization has strong social capital or networking system. Okay, so let's have a look at the creation of the intellectual capital briefly here. Okay, we have two ways to create the intellectual capital. Okay, the first one is combination and creation. Okay, knowledge is created through the combination and creation of the current knowledge to generate the new knowledge. Okay, and since Schumpeter's era, for instance, it has been suggested that we can create new knowledge because of we make combinations or we create new knowledge. Okay, by making new combinations, we actually combine the elements that were previously unconnected, or develop new ways of combining the elements. Okay, and that may generate the incremental knowledge that is related to the incremental innovation. If we trace back to Schumpeter's work, basically. Or it may generate something radical, the radical knowledge that drive changes in the organization and also for the customers. Okay, which is related to the radical innovation. Okay, right. So that's the first approach in terms of creating the intellectual capital through the combination and creation of the intellectual capital. The next one is the exchange and creation of intellectual capital. So if the previous one is actually through the combination. Okay, we combine the elements that were previously not connected or unconnected, or we make new combinations of knowledge. Okay, so that's the first way to create knowledge. Okay, the second way is actually to exchange through the exchange process. Okay, where resources are held by different parties. Okay, we capture certain resources. Our colleagues at the workplace also capture certain resources, and we swap with them. Okay, the exchange in here is the prerequisite for resource combination. Now you can see in here, because of the exchange process is required in here, so the organization has a strong interest to make sure that the network works well. Okay, now the process of combining the knowledge and experience of different parties is also dependent upon exchange between these parties. Okay, and therefore new knowledge creation actually occurs through social interaction and coactivity. Okay, so now you can imagine that when we exchange information, of course, we need to be comfortable in the network system, in the social system that we live, so that we are comfortable to do the networking with other people. Okay, right. Now, scholars also suggest the conditions for exchange and combination. Again, this is still part of the networking that we discussed before. Okay, the first one is the opportunity. So there should be an opportunity that exists to make the combination or exchange happens. Okay, so in this instance, the organization needs to facilitate the combination or exchange. Sometimes it is through technology such as Wiki, for instance, okay, or any other activities that the organization may perform. Okay, and each party must expect exchange to create value. Okay, so each party that is involved in the exchange process, the exchange of knowledge, should find that the exchange is worthwhile. Okay, either to make their task easier or to ensure that they perform the task accordingly, and so on and so forth. Okay, and motivation. All parties should be motivated. Okay, so that they can be engaged in the knowledge exchange and combination. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. Okay, and the last one is combination capability. So they have to have the a capability to combine information or experience. Okay, you can imagine that if we have 4 people in a small group of a large organization, and we find one of them is not capable to trade the information, then it's hard for the organization to combine to drive the exchange and combination process to generate new knowledge. Okay. Right, so that's basically network. And as a summary, network is another asset that the organization needs to have in their operation. Right, as an asset, the social capital helps the organization to get information, to improve the competition, and it also helps the organization to create new knowledge through combination and exchange. Okay, so that's basically our topic. Now, the next one, in the next session, we are going to focus on the assessment, and next week we are going to have a new topic in our module. Okay.